Divine source of life in the universe, you created each of us with the ability to open our hearts and our minds to serve you with grace and fortitude and love. Each of us, has the ancient rabbis teach, possesses in our souls a lev shomea, a discerning heart, a tender heart. Today, at this hour, in this grand cathedral of democracy, we seek your gracious love to exalt our compassion, to celebrate our capacity to reason, to practice humility in our decision-making, a quality which you folks and my folks could access a little bit more frequently. We soon enter the season of Passover for the Jewish people, the festival of our freedom. With an outstretched arm, the eternal God liberated the children of Israel from bondage, that we and our ancestors would never again be slaves nor strangers. We retell the Passover story each year at the Seder, and we say the words, "When I was a slave in Egypt." It is personal. It didn't happen to them. It happened to us, to me, when we were slaves in the land of Egypt. We know, you and I, what it is like to be enslaved, and we're called by our awesome God to create freedom and to care for one another. Outside today, on the steps of this great capital, was a rally celebrating the potential of love in our lives. And so for all of those who gathered, for our gay and lesbian, our bi and our transgender brothers and sisters, their parents and teachers and legislators, and the clergy who have gathered here today, let us pray. May this body be courageous and proclaim that we are not strangers. We are welcome here in this temple of democracy. With God's love, one day soon we will all join hands and march to freedom. Amen.
The chaplain for today is Rabbi Michael Latz from Shir Tikva congregation in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. Clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. The clerk will read the journal of the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 87th session, 2012, 95th day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Wednesday, March 28th, 2012.
If there is no objection, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will be approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Hearing no objection, the journal is approved and corrected by the chief clerk. Comparison reports. There is a copy of this order of business on each member's desk. If there is no objection, the motions will prevail. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail and the substitutions will be made.
Steve, Alan is here.
Stay up here until he gets here.
I think so.
Huh?
Just stay up there, because I want to give you up.
Thank you.
Reports to standing committees and division. A copy of this order of business has been placed on each member's desk. A minority report has been filed on House File 2622. We will act on all other committee reports first, and then act on the report on House File 2622 later. There are no objections. The reports, with the exception of House File 2622, will be adopted. Hearing no objections, the reports are adopted. We will now act on House File 2622. The clerk will report both the majority and minority reports pursuant to rules. We must take action on the minority report first.
I'll report it. Holberg, for the Committee on Ways and Means, to which was referred House File 2622, reported same back with the following amendments. Minority report. We, the undersigned, being a minority of the Committee on Ways and Means, recommend that House File 2622 do pass with the following amendments. The report is signed by Lyndon
Speaker,
Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Carlson.
1 minute, please. The member from Winona, Representative Plowski. For what purpose do you rise?
Mr. Speaker, I rise on a point of order, 2.10 on page 11. And under 2.10 on page 11, the last sentence reads, a member must not vote on a question except at the member's own seat in the chamber. We have seen today is the most egregious recent example of members voting when they were not at their seats. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to raise the point of order. I'm not asking you necessarily to rule on it today because I'm not going to cite one particular member. But Mr. Speaker, if I were to ask you to rule on it, on the bottom of page 11, there is 2.30, questions of order. If a member violates the rules in any way, the Speaker must, or another member may, call the member to order. I would hope, Mr. Speaker, that you would remind the body it is the purpose of the floor leaders to ensure that the members vote not a proxy votes for them. Mr. Speaker, that's my point of order under 2.10.
Thank you, Representative Pulowski. And since you did not ask for a ruling on 2.10, I will again remind members, we try to be very punctual on our start times here. If you could be punctual on your arrival time on the House floor so that we do not have to have a ruling on 2.10 on behalf of the body, it would be much appreciated. Representative Pulowski, thank you for bringing the point of order to the body. Chief Clerk has...
Carlson moves that the minority report on House File 2622 be substituted for the majority report, and that the minority report be now adopted.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson, to your motion.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'd like a roll call vote.
Representative Carlson requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call on the report.
Mr. Speaker and members, the minority report deals with the capital investment bill, and the majority report that came out of committee funds capital projects at $280 million. If you'll remember, when we passed the budget balancing bills last summer, we provided the debt service for a bonding bill of $775 million. And so what this amendment does is it provides for projects that would total $775 million, which is budgeted for. And I think we have to keep in mind a couple of things. This amendment would take advantage of low interest rates. I think that's vitally important. And some of you may recall when the governor gave his State of the State that he indicated that his bonding proposal, which was also at $775 million, would create over 20,000 jobs. That industry, the construction industry, is one of the hardest hit industries in the state. And if we want to put people to work at low interest rates, I would ask that you support the minority report. The other reason to support the projects that are listed in the minority report is that the majority report skipped over a lot of projects. And one thing that we've been very careful to do is look at the priorities of the higher education institutions, the University of Minnesota, the MnSCU system, and the state agencies. In fact, when those rankings were skipped over, quite frankly, 7 out of the 11 projects that were jumped over were in DFL districts, 2 were in Republican districts, and 2 were in shared districts.
Mr. Speaker.
Members, I think it's important. Maybe we shouldn't look at the politics,
Mr. Speaker.
The political part of it, but we should look at the priorities of the systems and what they said are their greatest needs.
Representative Carlson, 1 minute, please. Members, if you could, please. Take your conversations to the alcove, or better yet, the retiring room, so that the members who are on the floor paying attention can hear Representative Carlson's presentation of the minority report. Representative Carlson, you have the floor.
Yes, and members, the report that's before you also maximizes the opportunity for local matches, federal matches, and so on. So we would be maximizing other dollars that would be coming into the projects as well. So members, I would encourage you to support the minority report. We've put a lot of effort into developing a proposal that is fair across the state. And my final comment would be that the bill at $280 million leaves huge regional holes in the bill. That's something that's important to remember. South central Minnesota, huge holes. Metropolitan areas, suburban and metro, or the large cities, huge holes. I could go around the state, and I'd like to point out that back when we had an appropriations committee and I chaired the education division of appropriations, one of the things that we looked at very carefully was a fair regional balance. So in addition to looking at simply the rankings and the importance of the rankings by the systems and state agencies, we also looked to make sure that those projects were addressing the needs of every area of the state. And the bill at the 280 million level simply does not do that. So, members, I would appreciate your support in the minority report.
Member from Nicollet, Representative Morrow.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will keep this brief. Just two items I'd need to note in the minority report. One, members, you may have seen the headlines in the statewide papers. There were headlines as well in the Mankato Free Press about the Mankato Civic Center not being in the Senate bill, but the Senate choosing the Rochester and St. Cloud Civic Centers. So one reason I stand in support of the minority report is that the minority report is at least balanced in including Mankato along with Rochester and St. Cloud. And Mr. Speaker, I'll keep the second part brief as well. Members, we're going to run out of sex offender beds in our system in 2014 if we do not do the work at the St. Peter Regional Treatment Center. And I would say this regardless of where the treatment center was located. Members, we will run out of beds in 2014 if we do nothing.
A member from Dakota, Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And Representative Carlson said that we appropriated money for a bonding bill in the size of $775 million. That's not exactly how it works, and I want members to be very clear about this. The debt service for the size of the bonding bill in the second year is a function of the 10-year rolling average, and it's a part of the forecast. And so there was no affirmative vote anywhere. And quite frankly, the average in the first year is right around $100 million. And so if you take the fact that we already did $498 million last year, added it to the size of this year, and add the first phase of the Capitol building restoration, you are about at the biennial average of the 100 in the first year and 775 in the second.
Member from Rice, Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker and members, I rise to speak in favor of the minority report and the projects from my district, Rice and Steele County. The South Central College is in the minority report, and I have been working towards getting my college expanded and fixed since I've been here for almost 8 years. The amount of money that is in the bill is $13.3 million. This project is more than shovel ready. I have many students, non-traditional students, who go back to school in my district, in the town of Faribault and the surrounding community, who come back to school when they're 40, 41 years of age, when their children are no longer at home, and they are able then to leave their workplace and go to school and become an LPN, an RN, a medical laboratory technician, and also people in the manufacturing field for welding and carpentry. This is a very important project to my district. It's the hope that we have as blue-collar workers. We need this project for many students we have a large student population, and we have actually a waiting list for many of these professions that our children and young adults and even older adults need. Also, let me just say that this project has been ranked in the top 5 out of 26 by the MnSCU system. And always in the past, from my recollection, when these are considered to be put in the bonding bill, that is a priority that is used to determine the priority of becoming number 5. And we actually have worked our way up that ladder over the years. So I'd like you please to consider that project, and the other projects that I have in there are for our projects. We own the Minnesota State Academies for the Blind and the Deaf, and we have an obligation to keep those facilities up, and we also have an opportunity again to improve the lives of those children, the lives of those students, by building a technology center. Many of the folks in the deaf community are able to work and be employed and be successful and become taxpayers. This would give them an opportunity to be successful, to have an education, and get out into the workforce. Thank you for considering my projects.
The member from Scott, Representative Biskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. You know, I can understand the argument here on the House floor for Project X, Project Y, or Project Z. You know, people are going to advocate for whatever they think is important in their district. I appreciate that, and I applaud the legislators who want to feed at the trough. That's your right to make those proposals. However, I cannot stomach an argument here on the House floor that we need to go into debt because it's a jobs program. If going into debt is a jobs program, members, I said it on the House floor a month ago, I'll reiterate it today. $2.075 billion in projects that this legislature has authorized, but the administration and the agencies have not issued. If there is such a need for going into debt to provide jobs, then members, we have wrung that debt up. And the jobs are waiting if the agencies would just issue the bonds. We do not need to saddle the next generation of Minnesotans with even more debt because of some fictitious argument that it's jobs. If it's jobs you want, we've issued the debt, let the bonds and its jobs will get. I don't know if you members know this, but we hear all of this asset preservation, how important asset preservation is in our colleges and universities. Well, members, you may not be aware, but in budget year 2010, and figure out when the legislature issued this, in budget year 2010, we authorized $47 million in public debt for asset preservation for our colleges and universities in the MnSCU system. We still have $21.5 million, almost half of it, has been unissued and unencumbered. So when you hear this HEPRA, asset preservation is so gosh darn important. Well, we've got $21 million of asset preservation for our colleges and universities we authorized 3 years ago and still hasn't even been issued or encumbered. University of Minnesota, HEPRA, because we don't want our assets to fall to pieces. They're sitting with $26 million in debt that we have authorized, and they have yet to issue and they have yet to encumber. And yet we're told here on the House floor that we've got to take care of these buildings. 3 years ago, we authorized the debt to take care of the buildings. They have still not encumbered the expenditures nor issued the bonds, nor obviously put a single person to work. So we hear this, you want to stand up and advocate for your project on the House floor. I appreciate that greatly. But you want to stand up here and tell stories about how this is a jobs bill and it's so important to protect X, Y, and Z, and we are sitting, members, here it is, almost 1.5 inches thick of projects that are bonding debt that we've authorized and the government has yet to encumber or issue on the bonds. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. We don't need to incur more debt on the backs of our taxpayers. We need to take care of our taxpayers, take care of the business at hand, then we'll look at authorizing new debt.
Discussion to the report. The member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Biskins, I'll take you up on your invitation. You said if people would like to talk about their projects, you'd be happy to listen to that. I would like to talk about one of my projects that's funded in the minority report. Members, 22 of you have co-authored the Safe Routes for School bill. What the Safe Routes for School bill would do is fund projects around our elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools to help students safely walk or bike to school. They fund very small projects that just fill a gap in between where there might be a sidewalk and where there isn't a sidewalk. Members, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has said we have an obesity epidemic in this country that's threatening our military readiness, and one of the issues is that school children are not getting enough exercise. Part of the problem is they don't have the means to walk or bike to school. If we just do a few of these projects, it would help with their fitness and getting them to school. Members on the Republican side of the aisle, I think the reason I have bipartisan support is it's a competitive grant program. So only the most cost-effective projects would be funded. And it's a really very small appropriation. It's only $2 million for safe routes to school all over the state of Minnesota. So members, I hope that you will support the minority report and the Safe Routes to School project.
Discussion. The member from Clay, Representative Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm going to ask for a red vote on the minority report. One of the major things it does is it ignores restoring the capital. The minority report has building convention centers, community centers, hockey rinks, and ignores the capital again. We've already spent over the last 6 years about $20 million in trying to restore the capital, and we're still faced with a $241 million bill. It's time to commit. It's time to restore the people's house. So I would vote no on the minority report.
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Breinert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representatives Howe's issues about the capital not being included, I think, isn't relevant to the minority report because the capital bill is running as an independent bonding bill, which we'll speak to later today. But I rise to speak on behalf of the balance that is evidenced in the minority report. I have spent the last couple of days speaking to issues about South Central Minnesota and things that are missing in that bill for South Central Minnesota, but I'm not rising simply on behalf of my own projects or regional concerns. What I appreciate about and value in the minority report is that all regions are treated in a fair and balanced manner, and that is in the spirit of Minnesota and the kind of bonding bill we as legislators ought to expect, that our state is treated as one, and that the interest of every region is in the interest of every member, that we simply don't look out for our own region independently of other regions, but recognize the economic well-being of the state is dependent on treating all regions equally.
Member from Washington, Representative Dean. I apologize. Representative from Ramsey, Representative Hausman. I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, there are, as we've looked at total bonding bills in the past, there are all sorts of things we try to do. One is the equity that Representative Breinert just spoke to, treating everyone the same, regional centers, etc., treating Greater Minnesota Transit and Metro Transit, for example. But the other thing we have done is look to see where we need to match federal dollars. It's always been an important part of the bonding bill. And in this case, as has already been mentioned, this is a minority report to a bill we're going to see perhaps tomorrow. This is not a minority report to the capital bill, which we'll talk about later today. There are at least two items in here that I want to raise for your consideration. One is the Southwest Corridor, where we will have federal dollars coming. The federal government and state and local all partner on those kinds of corridors. We have a little bit of experience with that, and we now have the strong support of the Minnesota business community. On that project, the St. Paul Chamber, the Minneapolis Chamber, the Twin West. Everybody has been there at the table and testifying in committee about their strong support. They know what's happening in all other regions across the country. Our economic competitors are doing it differently than we, and they know we have some catch-up to do, and that is the next corridor. But there's another one that I would give as an example. MnDOT has applied for a Tiger grant. If we get that, we're required to have a state match, and we have the good fortune for a private match from a private railroad that is going to put in some money. There's a freight corridor between Hastings and St. Paul that is so congested, it carries the traffic of 5% of all rail traffic in the country through that little corridor. It's congested, just as highways do. And so there are some federal dollars available that we would like to match. And that's in this minority report. So equity across the state, equity across all sectors, higher education has always been the most important part of our bonding bills, and this minority report reflects that as well. Again, with campuses that are represented across the state. So members, for so many reasons, this is an alternative that reflects the broad needs. There are still many more that are not included, but at least we take advantage of this particular time, as you have heard from other speakers, for low interest rates, for bids still coming in well. It is a time when the taxpayer dollar will go so much further. I would encourage a green vote on the minority report.
Member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and I would like to thank the members of the Capital Investment Committee and the Democrat members that put forward a minority report that reflects some of your priorities in moving forward. And there's a lot of, as I look through that, there's probably a lot of very, very good and worthy projects that you have within that. There's also a very, very large bill, and it's probably something that is much, much larger than we can afford, and probably doesn't take into account the fact that we actually bonded, if you remember back to July, after a long protracted period of discussion, we had actually bonded $500 million in bonding projects that we actually voted for and brought off the House floor this year already. And so when considering that and considering the good work the committee is currently doing, Mr. Speaker, I would respectfully table the minority report.
Representative Dean moves to table the minority report on House File 2622. Member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, can we have a roll call on the motion to table?
Roll call being requested on the motion to table. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a motion to roll call the motion to lay on the table. Member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
And then, Mr. Speaker, a point of parliamentary inquiry. If you could
state your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you. If you could just instruct the members on which color they should vote, green or red, for a bill for the minority report, which is going to create a large number of jobs in this state, is nonpartisan, is spread investment equally across the state, and has a lower interest cost overall than the bill that you used in your budget last year when you did tobacco bonds. The interest cost on those tobacco bonds is actually more than the interest cost you'd be paying on this minority report bonding bill. And so can you just tell us what vote would be in favor of that bill, or in which vote, what would be against that?
A green vote would be in favor of laying the minority report on House File 2622 on the table. A red vote would be against laying the bill or the motion on the table. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the motion. Clerk will close the roll. There being 71 ayes and 59 nays, the motion to lay on the table is adopted. The question recurs on the adoption of the majority report on House File 2226. Member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just ask for a roll call.
Representative Thiessen requests a roll call on the motion to adopt the majority report. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call on the motion. The clerk will take the roll on the motion. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. President Banyan votes no. There being 68 ayes and 61 nays, the motion for adoption is approved. Second reading of House Files.
Second reading House File 1787.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 1972.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 1975.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 1993.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2097.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2171.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2223.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2232.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2398.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2437.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2580.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2622.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2729.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2731.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 2949.
Second reading. Second reading of Senate Files.
Second reading Senate File 248.
Second reading.
Second reading Senate File 1626.
Second reading.
Second reading Senate File 1717.
Second reading.
Senate File 1850.
Second reading.
Senate File 1860.
Second reading.
Senate File 1875.
Second reading.
Senate File 1911.
Second reading.
Senate File 1948.
Second reading.
Senate File 1964.
Second reading.
Senate File 2014.
Second reading.
Senate File 2069.
Second reading.
Senate File 2084.
Second reading.
Senate File 2137.
Second reading.
Senate File 2173.
Second reading.
Senate File 2273.
Second reading.
Senate File 2297.
Second reading.
Senate File 2334.
Second reading.
Senate File 2392.
Second reading.
Senate File 2394.
Second reading.
Second reading Senate File 506.
Second reading.
And second reading Senate File 1528.
Second reading. Introduction and first reading of House Files. The following House Files have been offered for introduction today. The Chief Clerk will report these House Files and give them their first reading.
Introduction and first reading of House Files 2980 through 2982.
First reading, House File 2980 through 2982. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following Senate file herewith transmitted. Senate File 1543, 1621, 1673, 1809, 2000, and 2313. Signed, Kel R. Ludeman, Secretary of the Senate.
Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce that the Senate refuses to concur in the House amendments to Senate File 1586, an act relating to public safety. The Senate respectfully requests that a conference committee be appointed thereon. The Senate conferees are Limmer, Ortman, and Ingebrigtsen. Gottwald moves that the House accede to the request of the Senate and that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 3 members of the House to meet with a like committee appointed by the Senate on the disagreeing votes of the 2 Houses on Senate File 1586.
Call the member from Stearns, Representative Gottwald. To your motion.
Mr. Speaker, we have some differences between the House and the Senate, and we need to go off to conference, so I would encourage support.
Discussion of the Gottwald motion. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion prevails. The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson, what purpose do you rise?
Point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Yeah, members, we just concluded the debate on the minority report, and I wanted to just mention a little bit of history. The idea of tabling minority reports is relatively new as an institution. As most of you know, I've been here for 40 years. And relatively recently is the idea that a minority report is tabled. And that goes back about a dozen years. Prior to that, when you debated a minority report, you quite frankly either voted it up or down. And sometimes when we begin to use different parliamentary approaches, we get accustomed to using them and use them over and over again. And I would just ask members to keep that in mind if minority reports should come forward again. I do appreciate the fact we were able to debate it today, but I want to remind members that we did have a long history where we would vote them up or down.
Message from the Senate. This is the Fabian motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the Senate has concurred in and adopted the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File 1567. Conference Committee report on 1567, an act relating to the environment. It's addressed to the Honorable Michelle L. Fischbach, President of the Senate, the Honorable Kurt Zeller, Speaker of the House. We, the undersigned conferees for Senate File 1567, report to have agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by all 5 conferees on the part of the Senate and all 5 conferees on the part of the House. Fabian moves that the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File 1567 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by Conference Committee.
I call the member from Roseau, Representative Fabian, who will explain the Conference Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Senate File 1567, House File 2095 was the permitting bill that we debated last week here on the House floor. We went to a Conference Committee. There was a lot of back and forth, some give and take. We worked with the agency. There's a lot of reforms, a lot more streamlining of the environmental review and permitting process. Senator Ingebrigtsen and I worked closely with the Dayton administration, the DNR, and the MPCA to address their concerns with this legislation. A couple of things that I just do want to touch on real quickly. The bill does contain the permit professional language as passed by the House, with some additional changes that have been asked for by PCA. It will allow the project proposers another option in the permitting process here in the state of Minnesota. Additionally, with working with the Department of Employment and Economic Development, the permit coordinator the title of that has been changed to the Minnesota Business First Stop, incorporating that into their program there at their request. It's another option that's available to entities that are seeking a permit. The 3-year pilot program that we put in for the magnetation remains in the bill, and I'd just like to encourage your support for the bill. Thank you.
Discussion of the Conference Committee report. See no further discussion. The clerk will give the bill its 3rd reading. All those in favor of adoption of the Conference Committee report signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion is adopted. Clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 1567, as amended by conference.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the conference committee report. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 92 ayes and 36 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference. The title is agreed to. First reading of Senate files.
First reading of Senate File 1543, an act relating to human services. The bill is being referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1621, an act relating to human services. Pepin moves that Senate File 1621, House File 2097, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1673, an act relating to performance bonds. The bill is being referred to the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Hearing no objections, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1809, an act relating to health. Gottwalt moves that Senate File 1809, House File 2237, now in the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2000, an act relating to mortgages. Kiefer moves that Senate File 2000, House File 2308, now on the calendar for today, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 2313, an act relating to insurance. The bill is being referred to the Committee on Taxes.
Hearing no objection, so ordered. Report for the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration. Dean for the Committee on Rules, pursuant to Rule 121, designates the following bills to be placed on the calendar for today, for Thursday, March 29, 2012. House File numbers 2544, 1416, 2160, 2784, 1134, 2341, and 2634. Senate File number 1750 and House File numbers 2409, 2359, 2736, 1899, 2263, 2373, 682, 2939, 2404, 2094, 1236, 1607, 2775, 1175, and 2128.
Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is House File 389. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
House File 389, number 4 on the calendar for today, the first engrossment. An act relating to local government.
Call the member from Scott. Representative Beard to present your bill.
What's this mean?
Mr. Speaker, members, thank you. Where we take up House File 389 again. Members, you remember a couple of weeks ago, we started a discussion about a bill I brought forward for primarily one reason. On behalf of the Builders Association in Twin Cities, I became very concerned that some cities were not liking building projects, but rather than just deal with it, reject the issue, or address the perceived deficiencies, they would simply declare a moratorium and put an arbitrary hold on the projects. House File 389 was the result, members. The bill was heard in the local government committee, and we had some great discussion. We held the bill over. We made some amendments, attempted to reach consensus, or at least a workable consensus, with several of the alphabet groups representing townships, counties, and cities. We amended the bill, moved it through State Government Finance, and then to the floor of this body, where we began a great discussion about 2 weeks ago. Members, I asked to continue the bill because of some of the great comments that were actually made on this floor. And so, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Speaker, and members, there is another amendment that's being handed out that I think reaches about as good a consensus as we're going to find on this bill. The reason I laid the bill over was to have discussions with other folks, including many of you, to try to reach this amendment, to reach some consensus so we can actually pass a good bill through the Senate and to the Governor. Mr. Speaker, with that, I'd like to wait for the amendment that's being passed out, and we'll address the amendment.
The member from Scott, Representative Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the a little traffic direction on the floor here. First of all, I think it would be appropriate because we were on third reading when I asked to continue the bill for the day. Mr. Speaker, my motion would be to reconsider third reading for House File 389.
Representative Beard moves reconsideration of third reading on House File 389. Is a 2/3 majority required for the motion to prevail? All those in favor of the Beard motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion prevails. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Nelson moves to amend House File 389, the first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A6.
Call the member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson, to your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And what this amendment does, it was brought forward. One of the issues on the bill that gave a lot of people heartburn was the fact that there was a supermajority required for the cities and the townships, and a 2/3 majority, actually it was a 4/5 majority, it ended up being, so they're deleting that or removing that. And that's basically what this amendment does. It's been run by the cities, the townships, the counties all agree with this. They're happy with this. And the builders who brought this forward, they're also happy with this. So that's what the amendment does, and to try to take some of the heartburn away that people had with the bill.
Discussion. Discussion of the amendment. The member from Scott, Representative Beard.
Mr. Speaker, members, Representative Nelson, thank you for offering the amendment. Members, I'd encourage an aye vote, a green vote. This is a good amendment. We'll make a good bill better. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the Nelson amendment signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The amendment is adopted. Seeing no further amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 389 as amended.
Third reading. Discussion. The member from Nicollet, Representative Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representatives Nelson and Beard, for bringing that amendment. I've been looking through correspondence signed by, I believe, the commissioners of 32 county commissioners. The county commissioners actually identified 4 objections, and Representative Beard, if the Nelson amendment took care of all 4, I'd be open to hearing that. But the 4 objections were that the bill would exempt a proposed development from a moratorium after a short window of time. Number 2, it slows down the process for enacting a moratorium by mandating 10 days public notice. Number 3, limits the moratorium period to 1 year. And then number 4 was the 2/3 vote, Representative Beard, which I believe we just deleted from the bill. They then underlined the following sentence: the current law is working and should be left alone. So, Representative Beard, if the Nelson amendment took care of all those objections, I think it would be helpful for the body to know that. And Representative Nelson, I don't know that the counties and the townships are saying they like the bill. I think what I heard was they like the amendment that took away the 2/3 supermajority.
Member from Scott, Representative Beard.
Mr. Speaker, if I could ask Representative Morrow to yield to a brief question.
He will yield, Representative Beard.
Representative Morrow, I'm going to answer your questions. I got the last 3. I missed the first one. If you could restate the first objection, I can speak to all of them.
The member from Nicollet, Representative Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Speaker, excuse me. Thank you, Representative Beard. Representative Beard, to be clear, I want to read this. It's a letter from 32 county commissioners dated March 21st, 2012. And Representative Beard, I'm trying to also print it so you can see it, but the 4 objections. And I'm going to read it verbatim. While the bills have been amended since being introduced, they still unacceptably weaken local control. Here are the worst provisions in the bills. Number 1, exempts a proposed development from a moratorium after a short window of time after submission of a complete... Okay, and then do you need number 2, Representative Beard?
Member from Scott, Representative Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Morrow, thank you. I just needed to catch up on what number 1 was. That is what we refer to colloquially as the grandfathering provision. And no, the amendment that Representative Nelson offered did remove that provision so that applications that are coming forward now are have the moratorium applied to them. The 10-day public hearing, no, that stays in the bill. That was part of the grand compromise. You can still put a moratorium on existing applications. You just have to take the time to notice it for a proper public hearing, have the hearing, and then, members, you can put the moratorium on. We also removed and answered number 3 concern. We had a 112-month limit. That's been removed. There now can do 2, as is in existing law. And we removed the supermajority. So 3 out of the 4, that's a 750 batting average in my league. That's pretty darn good. And part of the compromise was that people who are going to have the rules changed on them should have a 10-day notice and a proper public hearing before moratoriums are declared. And that is what's left in the bill.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Hornstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members. And I do appreciate, Representative Beard, that you've worked hard, I think, at one time even in local government committee, or now it's government ops. You took the bill back, worked on it, took the bill back on the House floor. I really do appreciate that, and worked hard and have, I think, assuaged some of the concerns. But I still believe that this is a solution in search of a problem, and that we really ought not to micromanage how counties and townships do a public process on controversial issues. And I still think that's at play here. And for that reason, despite your efforts, which I do appreciate, I'm still going to be voting no today.
Member from Rams, Representative Scalzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And would Representative Beard yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Scalzi.
Representative Beard, this Nelson amendment makes this a pretty good bill from what I can see, and what I'm wondering is what is the position of the League of Minnesota Cities and the townships on this bill?
The member from Scott, Representative Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Scalzi, I cannot put words in their mouth, but what I can tell you is the strong objection they had when the bill was first introduced has been assuaged. As they told me, we're never going to line up and say, yes, we like it because we didn't think there was anything wrong with the existing, or the situation as it was, where I thought there was a problem. However, the solution I was proposing, they've been involved in crafting and shaping so that they can actually make it work and still protect a neighbor's rights as well as the existing landowner's rights. So it would be an overstatement for me to say they're actually for the bill, but it would also be an overstatement to say that they're opposed to the bill. Clear enough?
Member from Rams, Representative Scalzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And then could you tell us then, Representative Beard, just how this process will work? And maybe I missed it in your opening remarks. I guess I was trying to find out where this amendment fit in, and so I was doing other things. Could you tell us exactly now, when somebody comes in, say down in the townships around Winona, and they want to say it's a new thing, but it's like the frac sand mining that got everyone all upset about things. Could you tell us just what the process would be and how this changes the current process?
Representative Beard will yield. The member from Scott, Representative Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Representative Scalzi, and members. To be clear, it's pretty much business as usual, with the exception of when somebody brings forward, I'll take a case in my own backyard, a crematorium. A funeral home wanted to add a crematorium, provided got all the state permits, all the local zoning they lined up with, went to pull their building permit, and as they went to pull the building permit, somebody at the City Hall said, we don't want to do this, and threw on a moratorium. Can't do that anymore. What you can do is say, you know, we don't like this crematorium concept, we want to study the concept. To do that, though, the City Council or the County Board or the Township will have to notice a 10-day notice that we're going to have a public hearing and talk about this application and talk about why we think we need the moratorium. That basically is the only difference now after what I've started with. What's left in the bill is the people who are bringing the permit forward have their rights defended only by requiring that the local municipality have a 10-day notice of public hearing before they actually have the public hearing and impose the moratorium. So then they can still do a moratorium. They can do them for up to 2 years as current law. They just have to notice a public hearing under existing law and hold a public hearing.
Member from Rams, Representative Scalzi.
So then, as I understand it, and maybe Representative Beard would just say yes or no, as I understand it, when the first application comes in for a totally new concept in a township or a city, which gives them lots of problems trying to get their RFPs in order, so when the first one comes in, they're not automatically granted as was understood in your original bill.
Representative Beard will yield. The member from Scott, Representative Beard.
That is a correct assumption, yes. Thank you.
Further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill as amended. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 76 ayes and 53 nays, the bill is passed as amended. Its title is agreed to. Next bill on the calendar for today is House File 1974. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
House File 1974, number 13 on the calendar for today, the first engrossment, an act relating to public employment.
Calling the member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski, to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members, House File 1974 amends the portion of PELRA that dictates the continuation of contract terms after expiration of a labor contract. And members, a little bit of background. We're currently in a situation with the state's two largest labor contracts, that being AFSCME and MAPE, which represent about 56,000 employees. Those contracts have been operating and extended beyond the period upon which they expired, which was on June 30th of last year. They have been extended according to current law and current contract provisions. And what we have, members, in our law is we have the ability upon the expiration of a contract for the same contract terms to expire or to extend into the future. And what we have here in these two particular contracts, as do many public sector contracts, we've got provisions in those contracts that provide for progression increases, both in terms of COLAs and steps and lanes, and also increased costs of health insurance to the employer. So what that's provided, members, is in this situation, and we see that again in local units of government, we're seeing that this expired contract that's been now expired for 9 months is on autopilot, and those employees are operating without a negotiated agreement through the collective bargaining process. So the taxpayers of Minnesota, state government, are not represented through collective bargaining in the current terms that those individuals are under. They, as I mentioned, are experiencing increased COLAs, steps in lanes, and increased health insurance costs because of this reality. This bill, members, fixes that. It puts public sector union and employer negotiations on the same plane as we have in the private sector. Members in the private sector unions and their employer do not have these types of contracts. I've got a copy of a contract here. They have the actual amounts for both compensation and health insurance benefits hard-coded right into the contract. So upon expiration, if they do have a continuance provision in the contract, they continue at exactly the same terms as existed in the expired contract. Members, this bill would provide a very parallel treatment of public sector union and employer relationships after expiration of the contract, very similar to what we have in the private sector. Members, this bill is supported by the League of Minnesota Cities. It's supported by the Minnesota School Boards Association and MICA. As a matter of fact, members, I was told by the lobbyist from the Minnesota School Boards Association, she actually went out and polled their members and asked them about this policy. They responded in the poll to a vote of 108 in favor to 14 opposed. Very much supported by those local units of government as well. It affects them very much similarly. And as a matter of fact, members, this is a bill that will help the governor in the protracted, now 9 months old, negotiating process that certainly, as we see, the unions seem to be dragging their feet in this, and the taxpayers of Minnesota are not able to participate in a collective bargaining arrangement. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I stand for questions and encourage people's support of the bill.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 1974.
Third reading. Member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you should all have on your desk a letter that I passed out from Commissioner Showalter. This bill is unnecessary. Representative Drazkowski talks about he held up one contract in his hand. When I worked for the Carpenters Union, we had 10 different contracts, and they all had different provisions in them. That they're not all black and white. The contracts, public sector and private sector contracts, are not all black and white about how, talking about COLAs. Some of them, when they talk about health care, the employer picks up 75% of the health care and the employee picks up 25%, various numbers. So when the cost goes up, their cost goes up and the employee's cost goes up. So that what we're doing here is messing in public employee labor law and negotiations between the state and the unions and the public employees. We should not be doing that. This is bad policy for us. When you go ahead and do this, you're basically, if you're saying you're not going to give them any raise when the contract expires, and it gives the state the incentive to drag the contracts out and make them work for multiple years without a contract, without getting a raise, and no benefit of getting back pay. And that's something that's in all contracts. That's part of negotiating of the contracts, is you negotiate that in it. And sometimes you get that back pay and sometimes you don't, but it's not guaranteed. This interferes with contract bargaining, and it's a bad bill. So please vote green or vote red.
Discussion of the bill. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill.
Tony, looking kind of Wyatt Earpish there. No, this is Where's House? he's getting all the green chicken shit. Or no, because he's getting paid out of this.
Clerk will close the roll. There be 68 ayes and 63 nays. The bill is passed. The title is agreed to. Next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 2160. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
House File 2160, number 22 on the calendar for today, the first engrossment, an act relating to public safety.
Call the member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish, to present your bill.
$21.60. Here.
Mr. Speaker and members, House File 2160 is a bill that would allow the law enforcement to take fingerprints take a file out of suspense. In other words, in the past, law enforcement has taken fingerprints and targeted misdemeanors and felonies. Sometimes through the procedure, if somebody doesn't get booked or goes from court and is released on their personal recognizance and doesn't get their fingerprints taken, it's not matched up with their records. And so it makes a real hassle as far as matching up the records with your fingerprints with your criminal records. This would not allow anybody to be drug off the street and fingerprinted. This is for somebody that's already been in the system, been convicted of something. They go out and they get trouble again, but when they come in to get booked and they do a name check, they find out that their file is in suspense. And so this would allow them to fingerprint them this time and hook up the two files and take them out of suspense. There was a little bit of a problem at first, and we cleaned up the language and struck some words, and I haven't heard of any opposition since we've done that. And any questions, I'd be glad to take them.
Discussion of the bill. The member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Cornish, I have a question about this bill. You referred to these in suspense records, and so my question to you is, would everybody who's arrested for anything be fingerprinted from now on and their fingerprints would be retained, or is it not everybody? If he would yield.
He will yield. The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Hortman, currently it's an option. They can fingerprint everybody anyway if they want to right now, but the ones that they're mandated to fingerprint is for targeted misdemeanors and felonies. What this would do is if they bring somebody in on a charge, they get them back to the jail, they do a check on them, and they find out that their name is listed as in suspense. In other words, the last time they were in, they didn't get their fingerprints. This would allow them to fingerprint them now. So it would only be for people already in the system that were missing their fingerprints. But it would allow them, it wouldn't give them any more authority to fingerprint in general than it does now, because right now when you take somebody to be fingerprinted, it's the option of the sheriff or the police if they want to fingerprint them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Cornish, I have my page light on because I'm hoping to get a copy of the bill, so that I could actually read the bill.
Representative Hortman, you still have the floor. We'd be happy to delay the vote until you've had a chance to look at a copy of the bill.
Thanks.
Either online or in hard copy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the pages probably can't see all the lights, but Representative Cornish, your answer to my question actually raised another question for me, and the question I have is, what are the grounds then to go out and, so what you're saying is if there's somebody who has an arrest record already, then this gives the law enforcement authority the right to get their fingerprints, but can they go out and pick them up, or does the person have to do something new, or how does that work?
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker, and this is only for the people that are already in the system. This does not allow you to go out and pick somebody up. If you find their record in suspense, no, it does not allow you to go out and apprehend somebody, bring them back in.
Discussion. Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2160.
Third reading. Discussion. Seeing no further, the member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker, remember, just to give you some comfort, this is an agency and governor's initiative, but approved by the office. So.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 116 ayes and 12 nays, the bill is passed. The title is agreed to. Next bill on the calendar today is House File 2373. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
House File 2373, number 33 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to public safety.
Call the member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, this bill modifies Statute 609.7475, which lists the number of people that it makes it a felony to file a frivolous lawsuit against. Currently in statute, if you have a prosecutor, defense attorney, or officer of the court, because of that person's official performance of their official duties, if they get a frivolous lawsuit, this would make it a decreased crime to file against those people. This adds sheriff or deputy sheriff. Basically what it's about is the sheriff testified in the, I believe the Sheriff's Association supported this. Currently there are a number of groups or people that if they don't like a sheriff's decision, they'll go in and encumber their property, file frivolous liens in amounts of millions of dollars against their personal property and land, tie it up and cause all sorts of financial problems for the sheriff. So what this would do is this adds sheriff and, county recorder, and only in the performance of this person's official duties. If somebody files a frivolous lawsuit against him and is judged that way, then it would be a felony, as it is with the other people in statute already.
Discussion to the bill. The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Now, I don't think this bill went through the Judiciary Committee, which I sit on, so I haven't had an opportunity to hear this, but this gives me some concern, Representative Cornish, and the reason is that when things are, this puts penalties on people who do things that are later adjudged to be false. And again, this came up recently on another bill. Who's deciding whether something is false? I worry that when we put a criminal penalty on somebody who files something in court, that we are chilling
the exercise of their right to try to get their truth known. And if people have to worry about a felony before they go and try to get some redress for what they believe is a wrong, you know, they're taking a big risk there. So I don't know, Representative Cornish, maybe I'm not totally understanding your bill, and if I'm not, I hope you'll clear this up. But this gives me great concern. Mr. Speaker, would Representative Cornish yield?
He will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Cornish, right now, if I believe that the sheriff in my county is involved in some bad behavior, say I have reason to believe that the sheriff is, you know, and I want to say up front, I have no reason to believe this about any of our good people right now, but say I did believe that the sheriff in my county was involved in drug running or some other kind of offense, doing something really illegal, where can I go with that complaint? Who can I take that to have that investigated? Who could I turn to as a citizen to say, I want somebody to look into this? And let me just say up front, you know, obviously county sheriffs are elected. They're elected officials. And, you know, people have told me, oh, you could go to the county board. But I think the reality is that it's a pretty close relationship there. So maybe we could start with that. Who would I turn to, Representative Cornish, if I had those concerns?
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Liebling, if you're talking about just general crimes, I think you mentioned drug running or something like this, I suppose you would go to your police, or you could go directly to your county prosecutor or city prosecutor, but they usually like it if you started out with initial complaint to the police or sheriff's department to have it investigated, then taken on to the county attorney or city attorney for eventual charges.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Cornish. You know, this is really it's a problem that probably ought to be discussed in another context, but I believe that what you've just said really is a totally inadequate remedy for a citizen who might have a problem, because law enforcement is, you know, they work together pretty closely in a county, and even if you live in a city where you could go to the city police officer or something like that, I think you're taking a big risk. And there really isn't anywhere for people to go. And as I'm understanding what your bill does, and correct me if I'm wrong, you know, if you went to the courts and the courts decided that you were wrong and didn't want to back you up, they could then turn around and retaliate against you, the sheriff could, by charging you with a felony. Am I misunderstanding what your bill does?
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Liebling, yes. You want me to go on? I think you're misunderstanding it. What the offense here, what they're talking about, is if you read the bill, it talks about on line 1.14, commits the offense with the intent to influence or otherwise tamper the juror or judicial proceeding or the intent to retaliate against, and then it lists all those people. This is currently in statute and has been for a long time. We're simply adding sheriff and county recorder to the mix on line 1.16 and 1.17. We're adding judicial under. You'll see the office is listed: judicial officer, prosecutor, defense attorney, officer of the court, and then they're adding simply on 1.19 and 1.21 sheriff or county recorder. So this would still have to be proven, and it would be an offense as listed there in that subdivision. So we're just adding sheriff and county recorder to the number of offices that are held that you can't file a frivolous lawsuit against. And I think it was the prosecutor, John Choi, that testified in favor of this bill along with the Sheriff's Association.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yeah, I guess I should have a copy of that in front of me, and I don't have that right here, Representative Cornish. But, you know, this does give me some concern. And I think what I'm understanding you to say is that this is also just limited. This is limited to certain kinds of actions by the sheriff. Am I right? Or certain kinds of. This is not just in general, that if I file a complaint against a sheriff and it's found to be frivolous, that I can then be guilty of a felony. This is only in connection with sale of real property. Am I correct there?
The member from Blue Earth will yield. Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Liebling, yes, it talks about this being tied in retaliation to the performance of official duties of the county recorder or sheriff. Not just generally, but in retaliation against one of the official duties.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2373.
Third reading. Discussion. The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker, I just should correct my verbiage that I used on that. It's not frivolous lawsuits, it's false liens, I should have said, instead of frivolous lawsuits, because that takes in a lot of things.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 121 ayes and 9 nays, the bill is passed. The title is agreed to. Next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 2939. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
House File 2939 on the calendar for today, the first engrossment, an act relating to education finance.
Call the member from Hennepin, Representative Downey, to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. House File 2939 makes a change in the process by which a group of citizens can petition to have their area detached from one school district and annexed into another. Right now in state law, the process is you have to, as a neighborhood group, put together a petition and submit that petition to the county board, making your request for detachment and annexation. And the challenge there is that in order to even bring the petition forward, that neighborhood group has to get permission from both the detaching district and the annexing district. And so you can envision a circumstance where that becomes almost impossible even to have your petition prepared and heard and negotiated at the county board level. And I have a circumstance in my district where I have a neighborhood of about 400 homes, entirely landlocked in my city, and frankly about one half of an overall neighborhood. And by virtue of an 1850s drawn school district boundary line, their kids are actually bused across Highway 169 and across Excelsior Boulevard and up to an elementary and middle and high school in a neighboring district. And so this group for literally about 15 years has tried various ways to try and have a chance to plead their case and negotiate some kind of an agreement between the two districts wherein they might be able to petition to enter into their home district of the Edina schools. And so, members, you can envision how you might try to address this for your neighbors. You could write a bill and just hard code a new district line. That's violating local control. And so the request that has finally come after years of working with the districts is this change in this bill, which would require that neighborhood group to get permission of the annexing district, but does not require the permission of the detaching district if a number of conditions are met. And you can read the conditions in the bill. You would have to be in the 7-county metro where these types of issues are more prominent because the neighborhoods have been built out. You would have to be located in a city wherein that city has a home district that provides a neighborhood school. and you would have to also be currently enrolled in a district that does not have a neighborhood school in your city. And I have a map being passed out, members, and if you take a look at it, you can see this landlocked neighborhood, and they're literally 10 blocks from 2 neighborhood schools in their home district, the city in which they pay a lot of taxes and can vote for the school board and the like, and yet they're bused to another area. And so this isn't to say we want to allow, or we want to, by virtue of this law, remove them from one district and put them in another. This is just about making the process a little lighter on them, allowing them to put their petition forward to negotiate the issue at the county board level and with the annexing district and the detaching district. And so, members, I'd encourage your support and welcome the discussion.
Discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Yes, would Representative Downey yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Carlson.
Representative Downey, years ago when I was on the Education Committee and Edina was represented by Representative Mary Forsyth, this proposal was brought forward. And I assume you're talking about the Hopkins School District, that neighborhood that you're talking about. The residents would attend the Hopkins School District. Is that correct?
Member from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Carlson, yes.
Yeah, and
Member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
if Representative Downey would yield to another question.
He will yield. Representative Carlson.
At the time we had a hearing on this, we had a room that was packed full of Edina residents, and they were opposed to the change. They wanted to stay with the Hopkins School District. And I'm interested then in terms of what kind of neighborhood support this is for the change. And then secondly, I think members better listen to this because there are all kinds of situations probably around the state, but especially in the metropolitan area. I don't represent currently any Brooklyn Center, but it's divided into 4 school districts. Part of Brooklyn Park is with the, well, let me put it this way. The Robbinsdale School District has 3 communities that are totally within the Robbinsdale schools, but they have parts of a total of 7 different communities. So this bill could have huge ramifications for a number of school districts. But the first question then that I asked you to yield to was what kind of support is there within that neighborhood in Edina, because there was not support a number of years ago.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Carlson, you are correct. This was brought forward legislatively. I don't think this is the...
Mr. Speaker, I'm having trouble hearing.
Yep, 1 minute, please, Representative Downey. Members, if you could, please take your conversations to the alcove, or better yet, the retiring room, so that Representative Carlson is able to hear the answer to Representative Downey's question. If you're good members, please take your conversations to the alcoves or the retiring rooms. Representative Downey, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Carlson, you are correct. I don't believe the legislation proposed at the time, however, was this process change that I'm recommending, which simply gives the neighborhood parents the opportunity to even have their petition heard. I believe they were actually trying to hardwire a new district boundary, and I do know that generated some controversy. And I'm not asking members to look and study this map, but the northwest corner of the city of Edina is in the Hopkins School District, and this is only the part of that area that is in fact in a contiguous neighborhood in the city of Edina, not the entire area. And the district, or the neighborhood group that's advancing this, I believe has petitions signed by 96% of the homeowners in that particular contiguous neighborhood. So they're not dealing with the entire area. They have 96% support. I think they need to have 100% support to even get the petition developed and heard. And it does not include the entire other swath of that area of Edina that may in fact be more inclined to stay with the Hopkins district. This area is physically separated by lakes, a cemetery, and a park from that other neighborhood that's in the Hopkins district. And so this neighborhood is very much a part of another neighborhood that's all in the Edina district.
If Representative Downey would yield to another question.
Representative Downey will yield. Representative Carlson.
Representative Downey, is this the only part of Edina that is aligned with another school district?
The member from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Carlson, no. Actually, on the map, you can see that there's two other areas where a group of homes and apartments are in the Richfield School District, and another group where they, I think, might technically actually be in the Minnetonka District, although it could be Hopkins. I don't know for sure, but there's a couple of other areas on the edge of Edina.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
If Representative Downey would yield to another question.
He will yield. Representative Carlson.
You mentioned that there were some apartments that were aligned with the Richfield School District. Is Southdale aligned with the Richfield School District?
The member from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Carlson, to my best recollection, the Richfield District boundary line runs to the east of Southdale. I don't know how much of the physical plant of the parking lots and extended shopping areas around Southdale are in Richfield, but there is a chunk east of France Avenue that is in the Richfield School District. I couldn't tell you the exact line.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Carlson.
Mr. Speaker, members, I'm beginning to recall, some of these issues have surfaced before. He's talking about one neighborhood, and I know years ago at least there was a lot of division in terms of the parents and the students in that neighborhood wanted to stay with the Hopkins School District at that point in time. There's been the issue of Southdale, which is an important part of the Richfield School District tax base, if that issue were to surface. So I would hope that the representatives from the Richfield area would listen carefully to this discussion in terms of what the impact would be. There was also a bill in a number of years ago that dealt with the Fort Snelling area, which was, I think the Fort Snelling area is part of the Minneapolis schools, if I recall correctly, and there was a movement to attach that to the Richfield schools. The point I'm trying to make is that this opens up a Pandora's box in terms of the alignment of school districts, and once this happens, you could have all kinds of issues that impact on the local property tax base, on student enrollment. There are all kinds of issues. So this is a very important bill to listen to. And I would suggest here today that there be a no vote on this issue because of the complexities of the metropolitan area school districts. And I do know that when my days on the Education Committee, there were issues that surfaced in Greater Minnesota involving these kinds of issues as well. So take care when you take a look at this one.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2939.
Third reading. Discussion of the bill. The member from Hennepin, Representative Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, I know that we have a long day on the floor this afternoon, a lot of bills that seem sort of small. I think we should listen to this one. This is not a small bill. This is a really, really big bill. I don't begrudge Representative Downey the right to protect some of his constituents, and I'm sure he feels duty-bound to carry a bill like this, but I just want to talk about what the unintended consequences are here. And full disclosure, I have the mirror image of his situation because I represent the city of Hopkins, which of course is in the Hopkins School District. But the name Hopkins School District is kind of misleading because the Hopkins School District includes 7 different cities. In fact, the majority of the kids in the city of Minnetonka, which is a pretty large city, go not to the Minnetonka schools, they go to the Hopkins schools. So there's 7 cities involved here. And while I understand that parents might want to send their kids to other schools, that's why we have open enrollment. So if the issue is that some parents in one city want to send their kids to a district in another city, that's fine. They can already do that. What this does, as Representative Carlson says, it allows districts to raid the tax base of other districts. And I just think we've got to be really careful before we authorize something like that in the 7-county metro area. And again, I don't begrudge Representative Downey. I understand why he'd answer the call of constituents or others, and I assume he thinks it's a good idea too. But the point is, this could really set in motion a bad situation where you have districts actively or maybe indirectly even trying to raid one another's tax bases here, and you could really truly pit black against white and rich against poor in ways that could be really, really ugly. So we have a process in place that's worked, where a neighborhood or a section of a city that seeks to move school districts has to get the permission of both the school district that they're leaving and the school district that they want to be a part of. That has worked very well for a long, long time, but I just fear that this could be a real problem. We don't need it if it's a question of people wanting to go to other schools. We already have that in place through open enrollment, but this is an issue of tax base, and it would really, really set in motion some really awful consequences, I think, in terms of raiding one another's tax bases. So I really urge a no vote on this bill.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Slocum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Benson. I recognize Representative Slocum.
Oh.
You're on the list a little further down.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, John, you're up next. I just wanted to answer Representative Carlson's question, and anyone else who has a question about the Richfield boundary. Edina has, the boundaries are fuzzy along Southdale. They're delineated, yes, but with the school districts, they're very fuzzy. And Edina has an area that is what they have labeled and are credited with the Metropolitan Council, affordable housing. And the kids in that affordable housing development go to Richfield schools. And Richfield schools welcomes them, and we serve them very well.
The member from Crow Wing, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, when we heard this bill in education finance, the Hopkins superintendent testified not very receptively to this bill. And he was notified the day before the bill, actually the day before the bill, that this bill was moving. And so would Representative Downey yield for a question, please, Mr. Speaker?
He will yield. Representative Ward.
Representative Downey, could you tell the body, please, the Hopkins superintendent that day, the day after he had heard about this bill moving, came to Ed Finance along with some board members and testified not very warmly about the bill. And what we talked about was that we had hoped that the dialogue will continue with the Hopkins School Board and this Hopkins administration. Can you address the body and tell us if there has been further discussion with the Hopkins superintendent and the Hopkins School Board on this issue?
Member from Medina, Representative Downey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Ward, and I think it was unfortunate in the committee. I don't know that the superintendent misspoke, but I think folks maybe misunderstood. This neighborhood group has actually been in dialogue with the Hopkins School Board and the superintendent literally for years. And so this has been an extensive and lengthy and ongoing process. And I think many members in the K-12 Finance Committee inferred from his comments that this was a totally brand new thing hitting the superintendent. And that's not true. Frankly, this has been an issue for at least a decade, maybe longer, for this neighborhood wanting this kind of freedom and flexibility. The bill itself I drafted without the knowledge of either of the two school districts, and I did that very intentionally because this is not intended to be about a spat between two districts. This is not about people rating one district's property value and levy capacity from another district. This is not about whether one school district is as good and the other is not. They're two very excellent school districts with plenty of tax capacity. This is all about whether or not these parents should have the ability to have their voice heard and to get their petition heard by the county board. And so I debated long and hard whether to even let either of these two districts know I was pushing this bill, because I honestly wanted it to be district blind. And I did not want the advocacy that you're starting to hear on the House floor to kind of stain what I think is just a good process change in favor of parental and family empowerment. And so The day before the hearing, when I learned that I was going to get a hearing, I felt like, at least as a courtesy, that I should let the superintendents know this was coming, and so I did that. And so the superintendent's comment was less about whether or not they're aware of this and engaged with the neighborhood community, and more about this particular bill. And frankly, a lot of what we're hearing on the floor assumes that my interest in advancing this bill is because I want to grab this neighborhood for my home school district. You know what? I represent 2 school districts and a little bit of Richfield, which I don't interact with as much. I have a ton of respect for the Hopkins School District. Their legislative action commission is excellent. This is not about 2 school districts. This is not about parochialism. Anyone who says, you know, I'm duty bound to come down here and try and grab a bunch of turf for my community, this is not it at all. And this neighborhood group has got a long road to hoe. Even if they have the ability to advance their petition by virtue of getting the permission of the annexing district, that annexing district has to manage the political dynamics between the detaching district. They've all got to work through with the neighborhood. 100% of the contiguous homes in that area have to agree. They've then got to put a petition before the county board. They've got to negotiate all the complexities of the tax issues and the levy issues and the cap issues. So this is a really, really long process, and we're just trying to give this neighborhood group and others like it a chance to actually have their voice heard and be part of the process. So I'm sorry I'm giving you a really long answer to your question, but the perception that's been created through the comments leading up to your question is that this is about me somehow going and grabbing turf for the Edina schools, and that's not it at all, members. This is just about trying to give these parents a chance to have their voice heard and go through the meat grinder negotiation process that lies in front of them.
The gentleman from Crow Wing, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Downey, for the answer. Members, I just, when we talk about annexation, whether it be with a school district or with a county or with a township or with a city, you know, I truly believe, and I think most of you believe, that both parties need to have equal authority. And we can't have one oversee the other. And I think, Representative Downey, it should, you know, all parties should be involved and engaged in the process. And so my question, you know, was just about, are all parties engaged and involved in the process? And along with the parents, Representative Downey, I respect the fact that you're trying to get the parents engaged and involved here. But members, another piece of this bill, if I remember, Representative Downey, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not going to ask you to yield on this, but was where the parents were upset because their community elementary school closed, their neighborhood elementary school closed. There was some neighborhood elementary pieces involved there too. And members, you know, a lot of us have had our neighborhood elementary schools closed because of lack of funding that we as a state have provided to all of our school districts in the state of Minnesota. And so, you know, like in my districts, the 2 that I represent, you know, we used to have a school of choice. Elementary people had, parents had the right to choose which elementary school they wanted to send their child to. Well, that's gone. That's gone, members, and it's gone because we haven't funded education like we need to fund education. And you know, with inflation adjusted, we know that over the last decade, funding has decreased by 13%, period. So while, Representative Downey, I appreciate and respect what you're doing, it goes to a funding question for me, it goes to a funding issue with me, and it also goes to having everybody at the table dialoguing about, you know, what is going to impact them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The lady from Blue Earth, Roseanne Breinert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Downey and I have had some of this conversation in committee, so I'll be brief and targeted in my remarks. But I have great sympathy for the intent of his bill, and that is to respect the integrity of the petitioners, this group of parents who really have the desire to send their children to their neighborhood schools and be a part of the community in which they walk and bike and shop and so forth. So I understand that issue, but I'm very concerned about the precedent the bill sets in terms of bypassing the existing process. And if it's the process that's at fault, if the process indeed doesn't allow parents the opportunity to petition and have their grievances addressed, then we need to address that process in a broader manner. But current law refers these parents to their school board. And having served on a school board for 12 years, again, I would say the last thing we want to do here at the legislative level is bypass the authority of the local school board. And if we have an issue of substance about that process, let's address that. But I'll just say that I did speak after committee to members of both the Hopkins School Board and the Edina School Board, and neither of those boards wants this solution. So, and I'll also say that Minnesota School Board Association and Association of Metropolitan School Districts also oppose this solution. So I think it's simply not the right avenue to address the problem. So I'd encourage a no vote.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Benson J.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Breinart just took my speech, basically. Those are the issues that I find to be the most important. Fellow members, as you all know, or many of you know, I spent my career teaching in Edina, the Edina schools, and so I know the area very well. I presently live in the Hopkins school districts where both my son and daughter attended and graduated. And it's clear to me that the superintendent of schools in Hopkins had very little forewarning of this particular piece of legislation. As far as I can see, the Hopkins school districts is opposed, and is the Edina school district opposed. And this decision ought to be left to the local school boards, to the local communities to work out. And I would like to repeat what Representative Breinart has said. If there's a problem in the process, then let's change the law. Let's change the process then. But this is another example of people who want to do good things here at the Capitol, imposing their will on local communities. I've been spending my time trying to get rid of mandates, and especially the unfunded ones. Then this is a sense of kind of another mandate again. And I'm sympathetic with the parents in that section of Edina, but we haven't really heard what their motivations are, other than possibly they want their children to go to a school closer. As you know, there is a dramatic change in the demographics of the area that I live in, and I want to make sure that I understand exactly what the motivations are for people to want to go contrary to what has happened in the past. So, you know, 35 years at Edina schools, I think I have a fair understanding of what they want. And having spent 30 years in my children living in a Hopkins school district, and by the way, my address is Minnetonka, but I represent mostly the Hopkins school districts, but also the Wayzata school district and the Minnetonka school districts. And I remember several years ago when there was a discussion of declining enrollment in Edina, I happened to be the teacher representative, and I suggested to the Edina schools that they ought to even consider advertising if they wanted, now that we had open enrollment. And a lot of people in my organization were horrified by that. But I want to mention that because the parents in Edina whose children go to Hopkins, they can apply to the Edina schools, and at one point a very, very large percentage of students who transferred to the Edina schools made up the student body in Edina. In fact, Edina was just about the first community, the first school district to support the notion of open enrollment. Not really to get students so much, but they thought this was an opportunity for parents and their children who, you know, had difficulty in one particular school to be able to have some options. So we have an option. Let's not go around the school boards in Hopkins and Minnetonka, especially when they really have not been engaged. That's very bad policy. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope we have a strong no vote on this bill.
Gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since everyone is listing all of their connections to the Hopkins School District and what this means, I'll just add mine. In addition to living in the Hopkins School District and representing the Hopkins School District, I have two children who attend schools in the Hopkins School District and was not in session today at 1 o'clock because I was in conferences at Meadowbrook Elementary in the Hopkins School District. which has about 45% open enrollment from districts all around the West Metro and in Minneapolis. So I do understand what's going on, but this isn't really about who knows the most about what school district. Although Representative Downey, you're the sole author of this bill, and Senator Michelle is the sole author of the Senate companion. It's okay to stand up for your community. It's okay to say that you're here for your community. That's part of what we do. But the real problem with this bill is that you're taking a decision away from 2 school districts and you're putting the decision in the hands of a county board. And Representative Downey, you said it's current law. It is current law, but only if you get the agreement of the school district that's letting go of the property. So that is, in effect, puts this discussion as an agreement between 2 school districts. And what you're doing is creating a petition almost as a matter of right, or essentially as a matter of right, to go to the county board to make the decision. So technically, the county board has final approval on this. It doesn't happen now unless the 2 school districts are in agreement. That's a much better way to deal with this situation than to create the possibility that a school district could send this as a matter of right to the county board. Now, I don't know all the county commissioners in the state. I don't know all the county boards in the state. I don't know if some counties really know a lot about education or are really heavily invested in the public schools. But I can tell you that in Hennepin County, I don't think that they're really the best place to decide these kind of battles. And what you're doing by creating this petition as a matter of right is creating more opportunity for them to be in conflict and more opportunity for county boards to settle it. And I don't know how Gail Dorfman or Peter McLaughlin or Randy Johnson or Mike Opat would feel about these kind of petitions, Representative Downey, but I do think they're the wrong people to be deciding it if the 2 school districts are not in agreement. Especially, I think it's a bad idea when a school district or when a group of people are going around current law and coming to the legislature for the right to send a question to a county board to decide an issue related to education. If there are 2 organizations that have little knowledge about education in the state, it's certainly the legislature, as evidenced by the terrible education policy we've been passing in recent years. And second of all, it would have to be county boards who really are not in any way connected to education issues. So, Representative Downey, I don't know if it's one particular set of county commissioners in Hennepin County you think are really great on education issues, but all you're doing is creating a situation where school boards won't have final say. The final say as a practical matter will be at the county board level, and I think that's a big mistake because they are not the best places to sort out education issues. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I would urge a red vote. I'm sure Edina will do just fine without taking a few more houses from the Hopkins district.
The gentleman from Anoka, Representative Peterson B.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I think the misconception that some of the members who have spoken in opposition to this bill would have you believe that this bill itself would change the boundaries in the Edina School District. This bill simply is about what must happen in order for parents to petition in order to get this process started. It doesn't reach to an outcome. It doesn't force the districts to make these boundary changes. It simply gives and empowers the parents to begin the petition process so that the county board can help mediate these discussions between the school districts. So let's just get that clear. This bill does not change the boundaries by itself. It simply says that parents will be empowered to get this process started. And isn't that the way it ought to be?
The gentleman from Scott, Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I completely agree with Representative Peterson here. This is a bill that smells a heck of a lot like freedom. This is empowering our parents in this school district to petition their government to find a right place for their kids to go to school. This is about the kids. It's not about the Hopkins School District, and it's really not about the Edina School District. It's about the kids and where their family wants them to attend school. This is a good bill, and I appreciate it being brought forward by Representative Downey. And I strongly encourage a green vote.
Gentleman from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I appreciate the opportunity to get up and comment on this bill. Just a couple of thoughts. First of all, I heard my friend, the gentleman from Golden Valley, get up and complain about, in his words, quote, the terrible education policy, end quote, that's happened the last couple of years. And, of course, the difficulty in this is that Governor Dayton signed those provisions, and Commissioner Cassellius has been going around the state bragging about those reforms, but I'll put those up and I'll stack those up to the Democrat Party's accomplishments when they were in charge, because the gentleman from Golden Valley knows that in 2010, when the Democrats were in charge of this institution, they did nothing. No, I don't mean it was a weak bill. I don't mean that it was watered down. They literally, with 87 members in the majority, did not send an education bill to the governor. So we learned from the Democrats. We're not going to make that mistake. We're going to have a bold, aggressive reform agenda that you've seen last year and this year. But I'll tell you, the one thing I've learned today is that nothing gets the Democrats in the legislature more fired up and angry than parent empowerment. Because all this bill does, as the gentleman from Andover said, is it empowers parents. It takes power and authority from the Hopkins School District, which has been vetoing this provision for years, and it empowers parents to make the choice. Members, this is a simple and easy vote. Please vote green on the Downey bill.
The gentleman from Itasca, Representative Ansels.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I actually agree with Representative Garofalo, who said that this should be an easy vote. I think it is too. Representative Downey used the phrase a while back, plenty of tax capacity. You better believe it. These are two silk stocking districts. And I've learned that wealth always prevails. And I'm sure these parents and citizens and school boards and at the end, the county board will figure this out. There won't be any negative consequences here. This is just fine. Vote yes.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Benson J.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Ansels, I don't have my silk stockings on at the moment. But then again, I was an employee of the Edina schools, and unfortunately, they didn't pay much more than any of the other districts that in the area. But over and above that, well, Representative Garofalo, we weren't getting into the issues you were discussing, except I did remind you one other time I'm a member of the Democratic Party, not the Democrat Party, and I'd appreciate if you'd call our party by the right name. I just think it shows personal respect, number one. Secondly, the reason we didn't get an education bill is because the Republicans voted so that we couldn't get a sufficient majority to hear the bill. It came at the end of the race. But for my colleagues who have law degrees, I'm going to commit a crime or a sin here, I guess, which is to ask a question that I'm not sure the answer of. Because I might not get the answer I want to hear. But if Representative Downey would yield to a question, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Downey will yield. The gentleman from Hennepin.
Representative Downey, did the Hopkins School Districts and the Edina School District each receive a petition from the parents? And did those two school boards refuse to accept them?
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Benson, join the club. I ask questions I don't know the answer to all the time, so I don't find that super high risk personally. I don't know, you used the term petition, and my understanding of the current law and the process is the petition process cannot start until and unless permission is granted by both districts. So I think technically the answer is the petition process has not started, it cannot start, and so their kind of formal process to have their voice heard has been stopped by a lack of permission. And I don't know, we might be in a semantic tangle here, but they have asked for permission and have been granted it primarily by the Hopkins School District, which, as you might imagine, creates all kinds of political tensions with the Edina District, who doesn't want to grant permission when their neighboring friends don't want to. So this is intended to kind of fix that process and allow them to at least get their petition heard and have some real negotiations starting. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Benson J.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to Representative Downey for that answer. But I think it gets to the heart of the question here, which is whether or not the school boards in Hopkins and the school boards who are elected by parents in both districts and the school board in Edina are prepared to move on this. That's the issue. And the question that Representative Winkler brought up is the key one, and that is, do we really want to bypass local school boards, whatever their reason for not wanting to move on this, and to go to a county board to do it, because there are some parents who wish? I just think that's very bad policy. Let's keep these decisions at the local level. These school districts have a lot of interactions and associations, and let's not cause difficulty between them. And it's just unnecessary. Let the parents go to the Hopkins School Board, let them go to the Edina School Board, and have those two boards work it out. I think they're perfectly capable of doing so. So this is unnecessary. I know it's wonderful to suggest this is all people power and so forth, but they do have people power. They've elected school boards. And those people represent the parents. And the parents don't like what the school boards are doing. There are such things as elections. They can pick new school board members or new superintendents to take care of these issues. Let's stay out of their business. Our job basically is to find the resources the schools need to educate the children and to set general objectives and priorities for the schools, not to micromanage everything that's going on. Leave this up to the parents in Edina and the parents in the Hopkins school districts and their representatives, those school boards. Let's not change that. Mr. Speaker, I would urge my members to cast a red no vote.
Gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Downey yield to a question?
The gentleman from Hennepin will yield. The other gentleman from Hennepin, or another gentleman from Hennepin. Representative Winkler. There are so many.
Mr. Speaker, there may be more gentlemen from Hennepin, but they might not necessarily be in the chamber. Would Representative Downey yield?
He will yield.
Okay.
Gentleman from Hennepin.
Representative Downey, if we pass your bill and it becomes law, who will have final decision-making authority over whether land will be moved from one school district to another?
Gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Winkler, as under the current process, the ultimate arbiter is the county board.
Gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Representative Downey, you nicely combined two answers together, which is, if your bill passes, the county board makes the final decision. If your bill doesn't pass, the county board makes the final decision. And I don't know what kind of waft of freedom that is exactly, to have different ways of having a county board make the same decision, or how parents are so empowered by having the county board make the final decision. From my standpoint, either way, counties really don't have a lot of expertise in making this kind of decision about what's good for the school kids in the district or districts. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. But what Representative Downey's bill does, just to be clear, because it seemed like we were kind of confused a little bit, what Representative Downey's bill does is say that you don't have to get permission of the school district that you want to take the land from in order to do it. You can have the petition and the county board will make the decision. So instead of having the school districts involved, which is more local, which is based on education, it's an education board, it kind of relates to the school kids. Instead of having the more local decision-making body with some expertise related to schools and kids making the decision, you want to make it easier for the county board to make the decision. That's all your bill does, is make it easier and more common for the county board to make the decision instead of the local school districts. That's kind of a funny smelling freedom to me, Representative Woodard, that you think counties are better places to make school decisions than locally elected school districts. And it's a funny kind of parent empowerment, Representative Garofalo, to say that county boards should make more of the decisions about what lands are in what school districts instead of the locally elected school boards. But that's all the Downey bill does. It empowers parents and it creates more freedom for county boards to decide who gets what land in school districts. And Representative Downey, it's okay. You should just acknowledge that this is something that people in Edina want, but it doesn't mean that it makes any sense. It's okay to represent local constituents who want things even though they want something that doesn't make a lot of sense. But the members, the rest of us, can decide that what these folks in Edina want doesn't make sense for our districts either and vote no. That's what we should do. There's no reason whatsoever to take away the locally elected school board's decision on land transfers and take that and move it to the county board. It's a shift of responsibilities that has nothing to do with parent empowerment. It has nothing to do with freedom. It has everything to do with some local politics in Edina, and we should vote no.
Discussion to the bill. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Downey.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Representative Winkler's comments, I think, were telling. While the misinformation about what's going on here, he was right in asking me whether or not the county board would be the ultimate arbiter. That's true. That's the current process in law today. My bill does not change that one bit. The problem is the county board and the two school districts will never get into the process of negotiating and arbitrating this. They will never get there because one district has veto power. And all we're saying is that in a limited set of circumstances where a neighborhood with in-district schools is being driving a long distance to another neighborhood with out-of-district schools should have an ability to get their petition heard. And so we've talked about bypassing the process, and we're in their business. And, you know, members, we are not doing a single thing to either of these districts. All we're doing is giving this group of parents a chance to have their voice heard, and the process that we're all talking about, the good process between both of the districts that will ultimately end up with the county board adjudicating it with all of the discussions necessary around transportation and physical plant and the tax capacity and all these things, allowing that process to start. Right now, the current law does not allow the process to start. So I'd urge a green vote. Give some people a chance to have the process start and have their voices at least heard. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Discussion. The clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. Clerk will close the roll. There being 73 ayes and 57 nays, House File Number 2939 is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is the clerk will report the bill.
House File 2634, number 26 on the calendar for today, an act relating to the environment.
The gentleman from Watonwan, Representative Torkelson. Excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. House File 2634 is a bill that deals with SSTS, subsurface sewage treatment systems here in the state of Minnesota. It's actually a language that was reached in consensus between the Association of Minnesota Counties and the PCA over the interim. They worked hard on this language. It really gives us some more local control over how these systems are licensed and inspected and in the state of Minnesota. And we've heard some talk today about the smell of freedom and the odor of freedom, and this is your chance to vote green for those freedoms.
Seeing no amendments at the desk, the clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 2634.
Third reading. Discussion. The lady from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Torkelson, I realize this is a kind of a negotiated settlement, but one of the things that worries me about this kind of negotiated settlement is all the folks who did a good job, and there were a lot of folks, a lot of counties that have done really good work, are being undercut by counties that don't do so good work. And we are in a drive down rather than a drive up in protecting our waters. And I'm sad about that. I think that we should be looking at the counties who do a really good job and rewarding them, applauding them, and not looking at the counties who have a can't-do attitude and rewarding them and applauding them instead. I'm going to vote no on this bill, but I understand it's a negotiated agreement.
Discussion to the bill. The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Torkelson yield to question?
Representative Torkelson will yield. The lady from Olmsted.
Representative Torkelson, I just wanted to be sure I heard you correctly. You talked about the smell of freedom. This is a sewage bill.
The gentleman from Watonwan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't really hear a question in there, but I was really just trying to refer to some remarks that were made on the previous bill, and I was hoping to get a good laugh, but I was unsuccessful. At least one person was listening.
Gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Torkelson yield?
The gentleman from Watonwan will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Torkelson, kind of following up on some of the questions we had in committee, is this a de facto repeal of the 2008 rules?
The gentleman from Watonwan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would say no, Representative Hansen. This is an acknowledgement that those 2008 rules were possibly very difficult to apply statewide. Sometimes one size does not fit all, and the 2006 rules are actually more readily applied in all counties across the state. And in fact, the bill does not force any county to go back to the 2006 rules. If the counties who have adopted the 2008 rules choose to stay with those rules, they certainly may. And in fact, if other counties wish to adopt the 2008 rules, they may do that also.
Gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Torkelson would yield for one more question.
The gentleman from Watonwan will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Representative Torkelson, Mr. Speaker, Representative Torkelson, is there, do you know of any plans or has there been any advocacy from the counties to repeal the 2008 rules, or, I mean, are we going to see another bill next year or later on repealing those, or is this your understanding of the extent of it?
Gentleman from Watonwan, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am not aware of any efforts along those lines. There were counties that I believe were having difficulty in adopting those 2008 rules. And my understanding is that this is really, it represents peace in the valley between the counties and PCA. PCA has endorsed this bill, and they obviously feel that it is adequate regulation for SSTS.
Discussion. Clerk will take the roll.
Yes.
Members, please vote. Clerk will close the roll. There being 82 ayes and 48 nays, House File number 2634 is passed and its title agreed to. Announcements by the Speaker.
Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announced the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on Senate File 1586. Gottwalt, Pepin, and Hillstrom.
The gentleman from Washington, Majority Leader Dean.
Mr. Speaker, I'd move a brief recess to the call of the chair for approximately 1 hour.
Representative Dean moves a recess. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The DFL caucus will be caucusing up in room 316 immediately after we recess.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. The House is in recess.